first inspired you to compose this work?
So the work was inspired and dedicated to my father, Giuseppe Di Vittorio. My father was a really big fan of Giuseppe Verdi's operas. And as long as I can remember, he would play them from, I would say, my birth until, he passed away in his early 90s, very long time. And to the point of nauseousness. And it just stayed with me my whole life. And when I became a composer, it really had a serious impact on my musical language.
Can you share thoughts about the composition?
Yes, so Suite Verdiana is actually what's called a free transcription, which means it's a combination of a new piece of music, and a work that is inspired in part by an older, in this case, 5 works of Verdi, operatic works of Verdi. So the 5 movements are derived from the operas Forza del Destino, La Traviata, Aida, Don Carlo, and Nabucco. And each of the 5 movements, basically the entire composition, Verdi wrote for larger orchestra, full orchestra, and I thought it would be an interesting sort of plan to make this more of a smaller orchestra piece for a variety of reasons, including the idea of premiering it with the Chamber Orchestra of New York, which is a small orchestra. And each of the movements has lots of Verdi, and I wanted to keep it with a lot of Verdi because of the connection with my father. But each of the movements either extends the music of Verdi as if he had really stretched out more music in the original piece for all the pieces, and either stretching out of the original melodies or rethinking, reflecting and changing the fabric of the original melodies. For example, in the first movement, one of the things that I did was there's the famous slow andantino that Verdi has all in minor. Beautiful melody, very memorable. Everyone knows it in the opera world. And I figured out a way to somehow rethink it in major. And it makes it obviously a more happy theme. The second movement, Traviata, what I did was give the original fabric of the famous La Traviata prelude, which is played by orchestras worldwide, and I stretched out the melody, just developing, elaborating the melody further, so as if very ideally intended, almost ghostwriting, intending for that movement to be longer than it was. But I had to decide what to cut from the original so that there would be breadth and room to allow the new material. In the third movement, Aida, I did a few things as well. There, I think the most poignant change or development was the very, very, very famous Andante, which is in the flute. The flutes have it, and it's a very, very lovely piece of music, very memorable, and I stretched that quite a bit. So it's much longer now. I think in the original, Verdi sort of stops and goes on to something else completely different, and then it gets very, very much more ballet-ish, larger aesthetic. And what I did was I just continued to stretch that moment on for a bit. The fourth movement, Don Carlo, this is the very famous opera, Ella Jamai Mi Amo. She never loved me, I think is the translation of one of them. What I did with that was, it's originally a bass aria, and I set the melody for trombone, and wrote it for our principal, really in mind, Bert Mason, our principal trombone player in the Chamber Orchestra of New York. And two things happened in this movement. That is an important change, the switch of who has the melody, the memorable melody. And then there's a very, very sort of reflective motive that Verdi has in the strings and the violins that just washes over the entire song. And what I did with that was later in the movement, I had a sort of soliloquy for strings where it's just the strings by themselves with a pizzicato in the basses, and I took that little one measure motive and made it into its own little sort of reflective moment all by itself. And then finally in the last movement, Nabucco, this is the more sort of holy ground for Italians, and didn't want to really mess around with this too much. It's often considered Italy's second sort of an unofficial national anthem. So I basically just reorchestrated it as an instrumental movement, often of course the original with chorus, and for smaller orchestra, and I added just a little coda, a little tail at the end, so that it would have its own sort of unique vibe. And that was it.
Okay, so question, why did you wait so many years to write this?
So I think a lot of it was I wanted to be sure that whatever decisions I had for the piece, for each of the different pieces of music, evolved, and I would be very, very happy with it. And I, as a dedicated piece to my father, that I think he would approve as well. That was part of it, him sort of, being here and saying that's a good idea, that's a bad idea, that sort of thing. So I waited until I kind of really had decisions made on what exactly I would reorchestrate, what exactly I would stretch within the actual moment, borrowing exactly from Verdi, what exactly then, as a third option, I would completely write anew based on one of the motives or the melodies. So that took a while to figure out.
And I know COVID happened in 2020. How did that affect things?
That was actually the turning point. I had sort of shelved the idea of the composition for a while. And then COVID happened, and I saw, we're back and forth between New York and Palermo, Italy. And while we were here, at the time, I would see, on YouTube, lots of Italians on balconies singing the choral piece from Nabucco, which I knew I had in mind as the fifth movement. And I thought, this is definitely the time to do it. So that was the year during COVID, 2020, that the composition was completed and then published at the end of the year.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thoughts about last night's performance at Carnegie Hall?
It was really special for me. I sort of tried to capture a lot of these thoughts and share them with the audience. And it's a very personal piece for me because it's something that I just grew up listening my whole life. And
so was this your world premiere?
This was the world premiere of the composition. Never been heard before, and when I rehearsed it, I was hearing it live with real, instruments for the first time, and it was a piece that I really wanted, the orchestra that I'm most involved with, Chamber Orchestra of New York, to lead for its first performance, and I know the musicians for many years, and it made it a very special experience for me to know that they were bringing this music to life for the very first time. So very, very, very sentimental moment for me, and to hear it, live with them present. And Bert Mason did an amazing job on trombone, and similar in Don Carlo, the fourth movement, Adrian Daurov, our principal cellist, did just an amazing job capturing Verdi's original cello line. So I'm very happy.
The concert was fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you.